Hello to all, to everyone who's joining in. Welcome, welcome. So happy to see you all. So happy to be with you. Just give folks a moment or two to settle just for a moment, and feel free, friends, to put your camera on. It's lovely to see everyone. And if you need to keep it off, we understand that also. It's just wonderful to see you all. And so, friends, I feel completely delighted to welcome you to the first Dhamma Lineage Storytelling Circle. My name is Jeannie Corrigal, and I'm part of the Canadian Prairie Sangha, who envisioned this circle as a way of honoring our beloved Asian ancestors in a form that has the sense of the stories being passed down from generation to generation to us, who can carry this precious gift forward. And we are completely delighted that Joseph Goldstein and Sharon Salzberg are here with us to start this series off. And we've put in the chat a little link to the Prairie Sangha website, where the recordings from this session and our virtual lineage tree, which we will build after each session, will be housed. And also on that site are links to each of our communities. There are 5 Canadian Prairie communities that have come together to offer this, to host this. And our individual links are on this website, and you can find out about us. We have tons of programming online and in person going on all across Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. And so as a result of collaborating with our good friends at IMS, I just want to give a wonderful welcome, or thank you to Alexandra Gekas and Elizabeth Hamblett. Elizabeth, who is hosting our Zoom session tonight. Many, many thanks, Elizabeth. As a result of this collaboration, we have a circle in this first session representing 33 countries from all around our beloved Earth. And it's our wish that everyone here that is hearing these stories, that hear these stories, can feel motivated in the practice. And that hearing them in community can strengthen our sense of belonging and connection to each other, to the tradition, and cultivate an embodied relationship with these elders. And so in Canada, and maybe in your country, we have a tradition of honoring the earth that we all belong to, and honoring the Indigenous inhabitants, something we call a land acknowledgement. And we do this at the beginning of every gathering. And this always seems similar to me to the sense of how the Buddha touched the earth as a friend, as a teacher. This is the spirit of land acknowledgement. And so I'm going to offer a land acknowledgement from the prairies, and we invite you to put your land or the Indigenous people of your land in the chat, so that we can all honor our connection to the earth and begin with this intention of harmony with all beings together. And so this picture behind me is of the prairies, and it's offered by Donna Anjali from our community. And so on behalf of the prairies, we want to acknowledge that we live on the territory of Treaties 1 through 8 and Treaty 10, which are the traditional territories of the Blackfoot, the Dene, the Sioux, the Cree, the Saulteaux, the Nakota, the Dakota, and the Ojibwe, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. And so we offer this acknowledgement of land on behalf of all of us as a way of coming into harmony with all beings, into harmony with the Dharma. Lovely to see all the earth places coming in. It's beautiful to see, have a sense together of who's here. And as we do this, we're bringing in the community of nature as well, in this extended community, our nature ancestors, our land ancestors. So thank you, everyone. You can keep on offering that while I introduce our Prairie Lineage Committee. And so Carmen Wyatt from Calgary Insight Meditation Community in Alberta. And Carmen's going to monitor the question and answer period at the end of the session. And a note to everyone, because of our numbers, we're not going to use the raise hand function. We have a special spot down below for your questions. And so you can put questions in there throughout the session, and then Carmen will be able to notice them. And at the end, we'll have a Q&A time. Tatiana Alvaj from the Edmonton Insight Meditation Community. Chris Gilboy from the Regina Insight Meditation Community, and Nell Ostrom from the Two Rivers Insight Meditation Community in Winnipeg. And Nell will offer just a few words on behalf of our community now. Oh, just while Nell's getting set up, you might see other people in if you look around the gallery to see the community, you may see other people with these backgrounds. And if you do, you'll know that they're from the prairies.
So thank you, Jeannie. I'd like to offer on behalf of the Canadian Prairie Sangha a warm prairie welcome to our guests, Joseph and Sharon, as well as to our participants from across Canada and North America and the world. So welcome.
Thank you, Nell. And Chris Gilboy will introduce our special guests.
Yeah, so I think it's, I'm sure that pretty well everybody is very familiar with our two guests, Joseph and Sharon. The teaching they've done is just so beautiful and such a gift, and it comes with really profound gratitude that I think all of us can feel for these beautiful teachings and the kindness and the amount of energy that's gone into the work that they've done, both in teaching and in writing for us, and in all the different ways, taking us on retreats, just incredible dedication. And we are the benefits of that. And that is something that is really, really rich. And I do just want to mention too that Joseph, the first time I encountered your teachings was actually on the prairies when you came to Alberta in 2003, I think, and did a 10-day retreat with Guy Armstrong and Mioshin. And that was a huge step for me, was that retreat. And so profoundly grateful to both of you for everything that you've done, and thank you and welcome. So I'll just, I think Sharon is going to be taking us on an introductory meditation. So over to you, Sharon.
Thank you so much. We thought we would begin with a very short meditation just to help each of us more fully gather our energy and more completely arrive. So you can just sit comfortably, close your eyes or not, however you feel most at ease. You can start, if you like, just by listening to sound. It can be the sound of my voice or other sounds. It's a way of relaxing deep inside, allowing our experience to come and go. And of course, we like certain sounds more than others. We don't like others, maybe. But we don't have to chase after them, to hold on or push away. Just let them come, let them go. And if you are not responsible for responding to the sound, you can just let it wash through you. Bring your attention to the feeling of your body sitting, whatever sensations you discover. See if you can feel the earth supporting you. And feel space touching you. Usually we think about touching space. We think about like picking up a finger and poking it in the air, but space is already touching us. We just need to receive it. Bring your attention to your hands. See if you can make the shift from the more conceptual level, like of fingers, to the worlds of direct sensation. Picking up pulsing, throbbing, warmth, coolness, whatever it might be. You don't have to name these things, but feel them. Then bring your attention to the feeling of your breath. In this system, it's just the normal, natural breath. You don't have to try to make it deeper or different. You can find that place perhaps where you feel the breath most strongly. Maybe the nostrils or the chest or the abdomen. Find that place and rest. Rest your attention. See if you can feel just one breath. Without concern for what's already gone by, without leaning forward for even the very next breath. Just this one. And if you find your attention wandering, you get lost in thought, spun out in a fantasy, you fall asleep, whatever it might be, don't worry about it. See if you can recognize that you've been gone, gently let go, and just bring your attention back to the feeling of the breath. No matter how many times you might have to do that, it's fine. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes or lift your gaze, and we'll end the meditation. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Joseph, I wonder if I can, as we start, just contextualize just a little bit your first question. Your first you. Here, just a little context here for the Dharma. Chris mentioned the Dharma in the West that you've, of course, been so instrumental with. And here, of course, we have Dharma. We've had the Dharma here since about 1885 with the Chinese communities. and then Vietnamese, Burmese, Sri Lankan, Tibetan communities here on the prairies. And then the tradition through the IMS tradition is rooted in the Theravadan tradition, isn't it? And so can you explain what that is and how that's manifested at IMS?
Yeah. So, of course, as we know, the Buddha was enlightened, it's said to be almost 2,600 years ago now. And for a few hundred years, the teachings were passed on orally. And that first period of time, that first couple of hundred years, is now referred to as early Buddhism. And during that time, it said that as the teachings were transmitted from generation to generation, different schools grew up, perhaps emphasizing different aspects of the teachings or having their own unique perspectives. And at some point, not quite sure what the dates were, but somewhere around 300 years after the Buddha's enlightenment, or maybe a little longer, it said that there were 17 separate schools that had emerged. One of these schools came to be known as Theravada, which means the path of the elders. And it was actually the only one of those early 17 schools that survived. So the only record we have of them and of the Theravada from that early time is what has been passed down to us as the Pali Canon, which, as most of you know, is comprised of what are called the three baskets of teachings. One are the suttas, or the discourses. One is the Vinaya, or the monastic rules. And the third is the Abhidhamma. So that was the beginning of Theravada. And then over the years, of course, Buddhism spread from India, first to Sri Lanka, and then Burma and Thailand. And these are the countries that really are grounded in the Theravada tradition. And in later years, of course, it went on from India to China and Tibet and Japan. And those are the schools that later became Mahayana. But Theravada is rooted in a very early period. And one of the things that characterizes the teachings, the Theravada teachings, not only the basic suttas and, excuse me, the Vinaya and the Abhidhamma, but also a very rich history of commentaries on those basic teachings. Probably the most famous of the commentaries, which many of us have either delved into a little bit or quite extensively, is the Visuddhimagga, or the Path of Purification, by Buddhaghosa. And really what he did was offer a commentary and an explanation of the very early teachings. So the traditions that came out or included in this Theravada tradition are various teaching lineages. And the ones that have come down to us here in the West, primarily, although it's not limited to this, one is the tradition of Mahasi Sayadaw of Burma, and we'll be talking a lot about that. Another tradition which is represented here in the West is from the Thai forest tradition, largely through Ajahn Chah and his disciples, his Western monastic disciples. And there are some other lineage as well, but these are the two, and the Goenka tradition. I want to bring that in as well, because we've also studied with him in India. So these are the three main traditions that have been carried from those early years of the Theravada all through the centuries. And it's quite amazing how the wheel of Dharma has rolled, over thousands of years and landed here in the West. So I just want to mention one aspect, which I think is important as we're considering these different lineages, and the different teachings. They have some very essential things in common, which are rooted in the very earliest teachings of the Buddha after his enlightenment. And so I think it's really important to always stay grounded in these basic teachings of liberation that are common to all the traditions. So even as we discuss differences in methodology or style or emphasis, all of them share some very common understandings, which I think all of us are familiar with. Things like the Four Noble Truths. This was the first teaching the Buddha gave after his enlightenment. The teachings about the three characteristics of impermanence and unsatisfactoriness, dukkha, and selflessness, non-self, anatta. So these are the root teachings, the basic teachings common to all the traditions. And each of the lineages develop their own methodologies for realizing them. And just to conclude kind of the overview, and for me, it just hits at the essence of what it's really all about. It's a line that's found very often in the Buddhist suttas, the discourses, where the Buddha says, liberation through non-clinging. So the Buddha's just saying very explicitly what it is that frees the mind. And these days, having studied myself in various lineages with different teachers, when people ask me what it is that I practice, my usual response is, I practice non-clinging. So it keeps it really simple. So I hope that provides a little bit of context for the lineages that have come to us through that early Theravada tradition.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Joseph. So it's really helpful to hear that, because it's clarifying that, that through the legacy that we're receiving through IMS is primarily in the Burmese tradition and the Thai tradition. And then Goenka is like a separate, is kind of, you'll describe how he ties in there. And so tonight we're going to have the honor of hearing stories in the Burmese tradition, aren't we? The Burmese side. And Sharon is going to start with Mahasi Sayadaw. And then on another evening, we're going to hear stories from teachers from the Thai forest stream. And so perhaps we could start with, should we start with a picture of Mahasi Sayadaw? And then Sharon, you could take it from there. Does that sound okay? So Andrea, could you share this screen? And perfect. So here's an early picture of Mahasi Sayadaw. And so Sharon, would you like to offer any context that you like and stories about Mahasi Sayadaw?
Yeah, I think I would like to start with some context, because when I consider Mahasi Sayadaw, he was remarkable in many ways, and especially historically for a particular contribution. So this goes back to the teachings themselves and the methods of meditation. So we develop many strengths in the context of these practices. One particular strength is generally known as concentration, and one is known as insight. The engine for insight is mindfulness. So I have to kind of describe these words a little bit, because they're used in a lot of different ways. Even within the one tradition, they're used in several different ways. So concentration is really like a gathering. It's based on this belief that most of us, at least in some arenas of life, are kind of scattered or distracted or fragmented. Our energy gets pulled way into the past, not in a useful way, but just kind of often full of regret, but not with an eye to making amends or changing it, just going over some situation where we have a lot of regret, or our minds jump to the future. And I would say, and our minds jump to the future and we create a scenario that has not happened and may never happen. So it's just this huge amount of our life energy just gets lost to us. So the process of concentration is gathering that attention, that energy back and settling, being more centered, having a sense of presence, and not being so fragmented, feeling more whole. And classically, a lot of the ways that was developed, and we still do it, is by choosing an object of awareness. It might be an image, it could be a sound, it could be the sensation of the breath, it could be phrases of loving kindness. But our goal is, when we're somewhere else, just to see if we can gently let go and come back, and gently let go and come back. So over time, we feel that energy, and it's very powerful, and it's very healing in a lot of ways, because that sense of wholeness. And if you look at the text, if you look at the teachings, you see that if you develop that ability to concentrate to a certain extent, you experience what are called jhanas, or states of absorption. Sometimes they're translated as trance, but I'm not sure that's a decent translation. It's like that concentration builds so strongly that we're kind of absorbed. And there come, with jhanic states, very altered states of consciousness that are blissful and rarefied and get more and more subtle. And so often, if you read the suttas, they're talking about the jhanas. And if you take sort of a historical perspective, there was a belief that was very entrenched after a while, that in order to practice insight, the engine of which is mindfulness, and that is really the path of liberation, you needed to have a certain level of jhanic attainment. So mindfulness practice, as we know it, there are lots of varieties, there are lots of styles, but it's not so much that the goal is just to gather and return and return and return, but you might start paying attention to the emotion, the sensation, whatever has brought you away, because within there are some fundamental truths about life, like constant change, or contingency, which you could call emptiness. There's not, it's insubstantiality. Things are arising due to conditions. Things are connected because of that. And so everything is said to bear these marks of existence. So it doesn't matter if you're looking at a knee pain or extraordinary joy or whatever it might be, within there are these truths of existence. And that is why we practice mindfulness. We pay attention in such a way that's not grabbing and not pushing away, so we can see more deeply into everything. And what we come to are these insights, and that is the doorway to liberation, because we really are seeing very differently. So that's why mindfulness is the engine for insight. So around the time Mahasi Sayadaw and several of his colleagues as monastics were kind of coming up in the ranks, the belief was very strong that before you could work on insight and therefore have a practice that led to actual liberation, you needed extraordinary jhanic attainment. And that meant that basically you had to be a monk. There were no nuns left. As a lay person, you were really busy, and you had maybe a lot of responsibility, or you're raising a family, or you're, and you didn't have the time, because there's another confusion perhaps, because the word jhana can be used in a lot of different ways. And in their understanding, and I would say still in many Burmese lineages, it's not an easy state to attain. other schools see it differently, and I know that. But these particular teachers in the time, certainly, and even now, for those particular teachers, it took time, it took devotion, it took energy to deepen concentration to that degree. So that meant that the only people who had a prospect of liberation were the monks, because they were the only people who had the time and the freedom to develop that degree of jhana, of concentration. So along comes Mahasi Sayadaw and his colleagues, and they say, no, you need a certain amount of concentration, otherwise every thought will just lead you astray, but you don't need that much, actually. And in saying that, he actually returned the prospect of liberation to women, to lay people. It was really like a social revolution. And it wasn't that popular, which I didn't know. You know, like by the time we met him, he was the patriarch. He was quite a bit older than in that photo. He was extremely chill as a person. The joke, I hope you don't take this as disrespectful, because I have nothing but incredible respect for him, but the joke, and it's actually true. In Burma, in the meditation hall, there's a wax statue of Mahasi Sayadaw, and it was very hard to tell the difference between him and the statue, because he was like so totally chill. And, you know, then I heard that when he was younger and he was proposing this, he'd say, go to Sri Lanka, which was another country in the Theravada tradition and very conservative, and people would throw rocks at him because he was like a heretic, you know. And it was such an appreciation also of learning from our elders, you know, like they have a history and they had a path and a story, and kind of picking it up. So it was quite incredible to be able to bring him to the States. And one of the things Joseph said about people like Mahasi Sayadaw, and I'm sure we'll talk about U Pandita, is that in many ways they're still living in the Buddha's time. The things they talk about are like the controversies of 2,600 years ago, or they meet someone and they may have no common language except Pali. You know, then they chat away in Pali. And so I remember, these are little things, but you know, bringing Mahasi Sayadaw to the States and to IMS, to the Insight Meditation Society. And one of the very strict rules of monastic life, if you take it very strictly, is no food after the noon meal. So when we go to Burma, or went to Burma and practiced, there was no food after lunch, which was like 10:30 in the morning. And no coffee, no tea, no milk, nothing. But you could have Coca-Cola, which you really didn't want, and nor could you get it. And one of the trips to the United States, somebody introduced Mahasi Sayadaw to Tang. Like most of you are probably too young to remember the breakfast drink of astronauts or something from my youth. And he said, "Oh, that's something you can examine it, so you can have that afternoon." So because we had nothing, you know, we used to arrive in Burma with like these jars of Tang that we knew we could have in an hot afternoon. So he was always learning and opening, but it was within that context. I don't know, Joseph, if there's anything you'd like to add.
Well, we have a picture that maybe we can bring in of Mahasi Sayadaw at IMS. But you've just kind of blown my mind, Sharon, with this. I didn't realize how important this was, how much he liberated the practice for us. I'm just totally grateful all over again. So thank you, Mahasi Sayadaw, for persevering, for your vision. So let's bring the picture now that we know a little bit. Now I want to see another picture of him. So maybe, Joseph, you could share in here and what it was like to be with him, and anything you want to share about Mahasi.
Yeah, well, this particular picture is really meaningful.
Leave the picture on, Andrea. Leave the picture on just for a moment so Joseph can tell us who's in it. Is that okay, Joseph?
Sure. So it's Sharon on the left, and myself, and then Jack Cornfield and Jacqueline Mandel. and we were, especially Sharon and myself and Jacqueline had all been practicing together in India, in Bodh Gaya. So we were old friends from those years in India. Jack had been practicing mostly in Thailand, and we met up when we had all returned. But in this particular picture, it was really a significant moment, because even though each of us had been encouraged to teach, to begin teaching by our own teachers, none of us had had kind of a formal kind of lineage recognition or endorsement or transmission. So when Mahasi Sayadaw came with the monks, he's, as Sharon said, kind of the grandfather of the whole tradition. And he was there, I believe, for about 2 weeks at the beginning of a 3-month retreat. And he and fellow monks were doing the interviews with the yogis, with the meditators.
Mm.
And I think it was a way of Mahasi Sayadaw checking out our teaching, you know, by seeing how our students were doing and whether they really understood the practice or not. And so by the end of the 2 weeks or so that he was there, he agreed to kind of have this very formal authorization of us as teachers in that lineage. So that was a meaningful moment for us personally, and I think for just the rooting of that tradition in this country and at IMS. Kind of gave the official stamp of approval from our grandfather teacher. Yeah.
Yeah. So then Mahasi Sayadaw also taught Munindraji, who also taught you. And so maybe let's have a picture of Munindraji, and then Joseph, you can say what it's like. What was it like to be with him? He was a very, very, very amazing teacher also. So maybe have a picture, Andrea, of Munindraji.
I love it when I see his picture. It just makes me smile because he was my first teacher. I'll give a little background to his life and then talk a little bit about what it was like practicing with him. So he was born in Chittagong in what's now Bangladesh, but at that time was part of the British Raj. It was East Bengal. And then as an adult, and India, Bangladesh became its own independent country. He was born into, you could say, kind of a big clan. His last name was Barua. And the Baruas were like this very large Buddhist clan, or I'm not quite sure what an expansive word for that would be, of the original Buddhists of India. As you know, from the Buddhist time over the centuries, the Buddhist communities were basically pushed further and further east until there were very few Buddhists actually left in India itself. And so Munindra and Dipa Ma also, as we'll be talking about later, they were all part of this lineage of people, of the original Buddhists, living now first in what was East Bengal, and then they moved to Calcutta and Bengal in India and in Bodh Gaya. So one of the most striking qualities for me about Munindra, and it makes me very grateful that he was my first teacher, that he was extremely open-minded and very curious about everything. Even before he became a teacher, when he was still living in India, but still rooted in the Buddhist tradition, but he would go visit, the different saints in India, the Hindu saints or whatever. He was just drawn to meeting all kinds of people in all kinds of traditions. He talked a lot about that particular time in his life, about the great Indian saint Dipa Ma, this woman who was very powerful and loving, and they established a relationship. So this quality of being very open-minded got transmitted to the many Western students that began to arrive in India, in Bodh Gaya, where he ended up living. And of course, Bodh Gaya is that small village in northern India, but it's where the Buddha was enlightened. So it's a really important spiritual place. He was there at first as the superintendent of the Mahabodhi temple, which is that beautiful temple at the site of the Buddha's enlightenment. So it's a beautiful, beautiful temple, beautiful big stupa, and a descendant of the original Bodhi tree is right at the foot of this temple. So he was in that kind of administrative role. At a certain point, Mahasi Sayadaw came to Bodh Gaya, and he kind of chided Munindra. He said, you're doing all this good work in the propagation of Buddhism and supporting, the temple and the pilgrims, but I think you should come to my monastery in Burma and actually do the practice. So it was really Mahasi Sayadaw who encouraged Munindra to go to Burma, where he spent about 9 years practicing and studying. A few things about that time in Burma, and it's also reflective of part of Mahasi's lineage. There are some monks who are really study monks, and their expertise is in the study of the teachings. And some monks, you could say, are more practice-oriented, and they devote themselves to the practice. Well, Mahasi Sayadaw and Munindra were kind of rare teachers that combined both. Mahasi was, as Sharon indicated, just a revolutionary meditation master, but he was also a profound scholar of the teachings, and he's written hundreds of books, and which are amazing to read. A lot of them have been translated into English. The depth and the clarity and the precision of his teachings through his scholarship. Well, Munindra was like that as well. He was kind of following in that tradition. So he spent the first period of time just doing the practice and coming to deep states of realization. And then he spent, I think, 6 of the 9 years, something like that, just studying extensively all of the suttas, the discourses, the Vinaya, the monastic discipline, and also a thorough study of the Abhidhamma, the Buddhist psychology, which, if any of you have looked into the texts of the Abhidhamma, it's not an easy read. It's a tremendous amount of dry detail. But for those people who have practiced, it is just the most complete and brilliant analysis of the mind and body and states of consciousness and the relations of one kind of mind consciousness to another. So Munindra became an expert in all of these teachings. And this was kind of an indication of a personality trait he had, which I saw manifest in many different ways, of just I don't know if this is a word, unquenchable curiosity. And just as a little sidebar, he once told me that the reason he wanted to do all that study of the text after his practice, because he wanted to understand the teachings for himself. He didn't want to just take the interpretation of the teachings from somebody else. He wanted to check it out for himself. And as part of that curiosity and that interest in that kind of exploration, after his practice period in Burma, at the Mahasi Center, he asked permission to go around Burma and study with many of the great masters. He said that there, I don't know, something like over 20 different methods or ways of doing Vipassana. Just all of these different techniques, which are a way of coming to realize the Four Noble Truths and the three characteristics. So he went around, to all of these teachers. When he came back to India, after his time in Burma, which is when I met him, he had just been back maybe for a year, and he was living in Bodh Gaya. I came, I didn't know anything about any of this. I was just looking for somebody to teach me. And he said something, and this is just so characteristic of him. He said something which completely captured my interest and really motivated me in my practice. Something so simple. He said, if you want to understand the mind, sit down and observe it. That was all. There was nothing to join. There were no ceremonies. There were no rituals. It was just that direct, if you want to understand yourself, he said, sit down and observe. And the common sense of that made so much sense to me, because how else can we come to understand ourselves except by this sitting down? And sitting down means paying attention to everything. It's not only obviously in sitting posture, but by practicing basically mindfulness, in everything we do. So I love the simplicity of it and the directness of it, and there was nothing extra. And another aspect of his open-mindedness, and this was something else he said that I find really moving, because in those years, the Westerners were just beginning to come to India and Bodh Gaya to learn the teachings. And there's just a lot of interest, in all the different teachers in India and the great saints. So many of the Westerns would come, practice a little bit, and then want to go off to some other ashram. And Munindraji was the kind of teacher that did not hold on to his students. And one of the things he said, which I just loved it, he said, go and explore and see for yourself. The Dharma doesn't suffer in comparison to anything. So he had so much faith and trust and confidence in these liberation teachings of the Buddha. He wasn't afraid to have people go off and just explore other things, and many did, and then many would come back and really deepen their practice. So I'll just tell a few kind of funny stories, because unlike almost every other teacher we'll be talking about this evening, Munindra was really quirky. All of our other teachers really had this kind of dignified presence. And Munindra was kind of like an elf. So just as an example, one of the things he would say so often, and which was so helpful for me in the practice, just a very simple phrase, but he used it so often. He said, just be simple and easy about things. Whatever's arising in your practice, in your life, be simple and easy. And of course, if we take things in that way, our life becomes simple and easy. So one day, in between retreats, I see Munindra in the local bazaar bargaining for 5 cents worth of peanuts. And he was a fearsome bargainer. And I'll just add one little PS to this story when I'm done. Fearsome bargainer over, a handful of peanuts. So I come up, I see him doing this, and I say, Munindra, you're always teaching us to be simple and easy about things. What are you doing? And he said, I said to be simple, not to be a simpleton. That was he was so engaged fully in everything he did. But just that little sidebar, on one of his visits to the States, we took him to a flea market. The people selling things in the flea market never saw anybody like Munindra. He would be driving these bargains with all these people selling things. Oh, these are for the poor children in India. You have to give me a better price. So it was just wonderful to see how fully engaged he was in life. So what else to say about Munindra? Maybe that's enough. The piece that I want to emphasize again, because it really has been the foundation of how in the lineage, Mahasi and then Munindra in particular, the quality that we've carried over a lot into IMS and then, as we teach all around the West, was that quality of open-mindedness, and the ability just to see the commonality in all the different traditions. So he was one of the least sectarian teachers that I've ever met. And I'm so appreciative that he was my first teacher and established that openness of mind as a way to both practice and share the teachings. One last thing, there is a book, there's a woman named Mirka Knaster who wrote a book about Munindra. So those of you who might want to learn more about his life, and I think the title of the book is just Munindra. So you might want to take a look at it if you were interested.
That's great, Joseph. We will put that book on our lineage tree. Our hope is to have pictures of these teachers and then be able to click on the picture and see some resources behind. So we'll put that book on.
Great.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Joseph. I'm just full of now this engagement and this curiosity. Sharon, do you want to add anything about Munindra? Then we'll.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing, I think, because it'll also serve as a marker when we talk about other teachers. So Munindra was a very great scholar, and he could give really long talks about any number of topics, including Joseph will remember very famously about silence. It was like 90,000 hours on silence, different kinds of silence. Anyway, but in my mind, he's quite well known for like incredible one-liners, because he had a tremendous facility to just say one thing, and it would just like your perspective would shift, or you kind of see things from another angle. So there's so many examples, but one with me would be when he said, "The Buddha's enlightenment solved the Buddha's problem. Now you solve yours." And it was, I think, first of all, it was very encouraging. It felt like maybe the first time somebody looked at me and said, "You can solve your problem." But it was perfect. And there were many times like that. And so it was one of his great strengths as a teacher.
Well, Sharon, now we'll try to put some of those one-liners on our virtual tree too. Thank you so much. And so now Munindra taught Dipa Ma. And so let's have a picture of Dipa Ma, and then Sharon, you could share some things about this beloved teacher. And so thanks, Andrea, for sharing a picture of Dipa Ma. I just love that picture. Is that what meeting her was like? Is that a sense of her? And so Sharon, what was it like to be with her?
Someday you have to find the picture of her walking with Joseph from behind. Because
That one.
Joseph is what, 6'3.5" or something, and she was a tiny little woman, and she came about up to his waist. It's so cute. So Dipa Ma went to practice. I believe at first Munindra was her translator, and then later became her teacher. And there's also a book about her, which is called Dipa Ma, which will detail her life. And I sort of said that last thing about Munindra because I felt that the woman writing the book was going to have a big challenge, because I don't remember many one-liners coming from Dipa Ma, if any. You know, it was very hard to encapsulate her teachings into words. It was so much more her presence, which was so beautifully loving. And I thought, it's all going to be the same story. Like, I felt really bad. I went into her room. I felt a lot better, you know. So I wasn't too sure, but the book is actually very good. So Dipa Ma, as the story goes, and I may have slight details off, but it's basically her story. You know, had a life of her time. She was put into an arranged marriage when she was about 12 years old. Unusually, she and her husband fell deeply in love, and then they didn't have children for about 18 years, which was considered her fault. And her husband's family wanted him to take another wife, which he always refused to do because he loved her. And then they had 3 children. 2 of them died. And she had one. Dipa Ma is like a nickname, Deepa's mother. She also was a Barua, Nani Bala Barua. So she and her husband were living in Burma. He was in the civil service, raising Dipa. And then her husband didn't feel well one day, came home from work, and he died by that night. And she was so grief-stricken that she developed a heart condition and went to bed. Like, she couldn't function. And the doctor came, and it being Burma, he said, "You're actually going to die of a broken heart unless you do something about your mind. You should learn how to meditate." And she still had deep race. She got up out of bed. She went to the meditation center, and they said that she was so weak she couldn't walk up the stairs to the floor that the meditation hall was on. So she crawled. And when she emerged from that retreat, something had happened. So that somehow all of that sorrow and the devastating physical consequences of all the grief had somehow become this huge compassion. And she emerged, and she was so like that. It was always very maternal, not very formal. Like, I mean, just think about what she'd been through. And you go see her, and she'd really be concerned. How was your journey? Do you have enough tea? Do you want a biscuit? And it's easy to imagine not, going through all that and not going nearly in that direction of interest and care about others. But that's what she was like. And so she was also tough as a teacher. I mean, she was no naps if you were on retreat with Dipa Ma, and it was very much in the style of Mahasi Sayadaw and mental noting and, working with the breath and then the body and then more objects of mindfulness. And so again, it's almost hard to know what to say in quoting her, because it was just this enormous love. She was the person who told me to teach. So she's directly responsible for that. I got Joseph had already come back. We had met, Joseph and I, at my first retreat, which was January of 1971 with Goenka in Bodh Gaya. And Joseph had already been there practicing for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, something like that. And this group of Westerners came and destroyed his peace by moving in and doing this retreat. And we met Dipa Ma not all that long after. So I went to see Dipa Ma in Calcutta in 1974 in order to get her blessing for what I thought was going to be my very, very short trip back to the States. And Joseph had already come back maybe 6 months before that. And so she said to me, when you go back, you'll be teaching with Joseph. And I said, no, I won't. And she said, yes, you will. I said, no, I won't. And she said, yes, you will. And we sort of went back and forth. And I ended up leaving her room thinking, no, I won't. That's ridiculous, you know, but there it was. And of course, it took me some time to realize, you know, after being back, oh, she was right. Look at that. So that's my closest reason that I teach, that I've taught.
I've heard how much she influenced you and how much love she had. Like, how did your metta style come about? You know, was it from her? Was it from a combination of people, of teachers?
I mean, in a way, it was a combo, but really, it was U Pandita. Sayadaw. My first teacher was S.N. Goenka, and he taught in a 10-day format, a retreat. And it was really a mindfulness retreat. It was the breath at the nostrils, and then what we call the body scan these days. He called it sweeping, popularized these days by John Kabat-Zinn, who it's just like a patterned awareness throughout your body, whatever sensations you might feel, responding with as much equanimity as you can have toward pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral sensations. And John starts at the feet. I think Goenka started at the head. And so we did the breath for, I think, 3 days. And then the rest of the time was the sweeping or body scan. And then the very end of the retreat is almost a kind of ceremonial way of saying goodbye. Goenka led a loving kindness meditation.
Wow.
And it was about sensation, because he's was so into sensation and offering these sensations of love and warmth. And I thought, what is that one? You know, like, but I didn't really have a chance to practice it formally under guidance until I went to Burma for 3 months in 1985. And that was Sayadaw U Pandita.
That was Sayadaw U Pandita. Okay. Well, let's have a picture of Goenka. And then maybe we can talk about Sayadaw U Pandita. Does that sound okay?
Sure.
So, Andrea, if you could show a picture of Goenka, and thank you so much. So, Sharon, this is the teacher that really brought in the body, the sweeping practice, and really what was one of the effects of that? What was one of the impacts of that?
Well, I mean, he really was my first teacher. So just as Joseph would talk about Munindra, you know, it was everything. It was the beginning. I would also say that he was the first night of my first retreat. So this is really foundational for me. Goenka said the Buddha did not teach Buddhism. The Buddha taught a way of life. And so this is completely open to anybody. It's about the power of your own awareness. He was very into method and practice, and go back and sit, you'll figure it out. And that became really the pillar of my understanding. The Buddha did not teach Buddhism. This is not about becoming a Buddhist. This is not about rejecting anything else. So that was very important for me. And another thing that was very important for me and useful was that he was very structured, you know, that there's a way to practice, and you did it, and you knew if you were doing it or you were distracted. And in contrast to, say, Munindra, who was not he was unstructured in terms of his demands for a daily regularity or something like that. So I got to Bodh Gaya, this amazing town, before Goenka's retreat was going to begin. And it was in this compound called the Burmese Vihara. It's sort of like a temple, monastery kind of thing. which was somewhat down the road from the main part of town, which in those days was just the tree, the descendant of the tree the Buddha was sitting under when he became enlightened, the beautiful temple, a few chai shops, a few tailor shops, a couple of temples. And we were some distance away down a dry riverbed, and I saw Munindra. He was living there. You know, I met him before the retreat started, and I overheard somebody saying to him, "I'd like to go into town and get some chai." And Munindra said, "Oh, go, just go mindfully." And I thought, what does that mean? You know? And then Goenka came and he locked the gate. And to get out, you literally had to climb out over this gate. Although, like, cookie vendors would come and they'd sell you cookies through the gate. But, you know, there was a schedule. And that was important for me in the beginning. You know, it was a very different thing than what seems right to me right now, you know, so.
That's really helpful.
So from him, we do have the model of the course, the retreat. Sometimes people think we made it up. We didn't make it up at all. It came completely from him.
From Goenka.
Goenka.
Huh. You don't lock the gate, though.
No, we don't have a gate.
That's real. That's so we're really the heir from Goenka, and then in every retreat we practice. Then that you adopted his style as a way of giving some structure.
Yeah.
That's great. And then the other teachers with other styles, a little bit looser, bringing it into everyday life might be different. That's beautiful. Thank you. So let's talk about maybe Sayadaw U Pandita.
Yeah.
Before we do that, Andrea has found us a treat. Andrea, can you share the picture that you found? Sharon, you mentioned this picture, and so Andrea, I think, went ahead and found it.
Oh, good.
There we go. That's such a beautiful shot.
What I love about that picture is the difference in our physical size, but then when I think of Dipa Ma, her heart and mind were so vast, you know, and mine in comparison was really small. So the physical form may have been towering, but always when I think of Dipa Ma, it's funny how, you know, sometimes people may be of a smaller stature, but they have a power and energy or a presence that you don't think of them that way. You think of them as being so big. And that's how it was with Dipa Ma, because, you know, somebody once asked her when she was here in the States, well, what's your mind like? What's in your mind? And she said, concentration, peace, and love. That's quite remarkable. That's the only thing that was in her mind, you know. And so it is amazing. She was just one other thing which will tie in a little bit, both to Goenka, kind of ties them all together in terms of their different styles. So Munindra, as Sharon just mentioned, was very open. He didn't impose anything really, and it was before the retreat model. So we were just practicing on our own, in whatever level of dedication we had. So Goenka came, it was much more structured. With Dipa Ma, it was really interesting because, as Sharon said, she could be a very trying to find the right word. Expect a lot from students, but my experience was that it was never imposed. She would say, you know, but at least for myself, but I think this is true of almost all of us, we were just inspired to do it because of who she was. So it wasn't like coming down from the top, you have to do this, this, and this, although she gave, you know, the guidelines. but she would just say something, and because it was with so much love and care, and she was such an inspiration that we wanted to do it, and so no naps or just sleeping 3 or 4 hours a night, and we undertook it from that place. Well, now going to U Pandita, he was more in terms of style, not technique or method, but more like Goenka. Very structured, a schedule, a rigorous schedule, like 14 hours a day of sitting and walking. He was a warrior. And basically, he would give some talks about the armies of Mara, the 10 armies of Mara, which are all the defilements in the mind. And he was like this warrior going into battle with the armies of Mara, and so he was an effort walla, just really emphasizing heroic effort in the practice. And it was really interesting for me at that time, even though I'm so grateful that I started with Munindra, and he was more like a Taoist, very open and easeful. And it served me well. Those early years, it really was just right for me. But by the time Sayadaw U Pandita came, he first came in 1984. It was his first course. Somewhat famous or infamous, depending on how people responded to his teachings. But by then, both I had done many, many years of practice and also teaching for 10 years by that time. But my practice had reached kind of a plateau that was very comfortable. My practice was flowing along quite easily, and it was easeful. But it had kind of plateaued. And so when Sayadaw U Pandita came with this strong, heroic effort, and he really demanded it, if you were going to study with him, this is what you did. It really upped the level, of my practice significantly. And I got a whole new sense of what strong, wise effort can bring to the practice. So I'll just give a few examples of ways he did that, the methodology of it in the way he taught, just simple things, but maybe it'll give an indication of the level of precision that he was looking for. So one way he did that was through the reporting form. So we would be seeing him 6 times a week. We would be going in every day reporting, and we had to report how many hours we slept, how many hours we sat, how many hours we walked. So it was really holding us accountable. We couldn't. we had to really be doing it. And then in the way we reported, it was a very strict form. And this is just a really quick summary of it. So we would be saying, with the rising movement, noted it as rising, and this is what I felt. And so we had to be very precise in the rising movement. What were the actual sensations that were felt in the falling, in the step? And then with all the other objects that come into practice, we'd have to acknowledge what the object was, whether we noted it, and then a very interesting instruction. He would always want us to report what happened to the object as we were noticing it, as we were being mindful. So surprisingly, such a simple question, it really demanded a very close attention. If we weren't paying very precise attention to each of these moments of experience, we really wouldn't be able to say what happened. Somehow another object arose. But with that kind of instruction, maybe we're with a sensation and with being mindful of it, and it got stronger, or it got weaker, or it disappeared, or it changed position, something like that. It was a very, very skillful and very demanding way of refining the quality of our mindfulness. So this was just one example, in addition to the rather demanding structure of the retreat. One of the things that I like to convey about Sayadaw U Pandita, because we love to tell the stories of his fierceness, you know, and he was really fierce. You know? In his teaching, he absolutely did not care what we thought of him. Right? So he wasn't holding back, you know, so we'd like him. He was doing battle with the armies of Mara, and we were the foot soldiers, you know. And however, so there are lots of stories, you know, of this kind of fierce quality. But there was also a tremendously loving side to him. And every once in a while, this loving side would just come out, and first it was a little surprising the first few times. But particularly, you know, when we were in Burma, and, you know, if we got sick in some way or not feeling well, or he'd be very solicitous of our health, offering us all kinds of Burmese medicine, very concerned about whether we were getting enough to eat. And so he had this motherly side as well, which was really beautiful, you know. And so there was this balance, even, you know, in the midst of that very kind of strict and demanding way of teaching. Yeah, so that's fierce and loving. I think that in a way encapsulates him, and had a profound effect, I think, for Sharon and myself and many other people, because he upped our game. And to whatever extent we're able, you know, trying to at least do a little bit of that, you know, as we teach.
Yeah, so you kind of bring that in and try to motivate us
Yeah.
to also do our best and step up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was my metta teacher, which people always find very amusing because of his personality. Being so demanding and fierce, but as Joseph said, very loving also.
So did he teach the phrases? That's where you got.
Yeah.
Well, we have one last picture to share, and that's of Sayadaw U Pandita. So maybe we'll do that, and then Sharon, you could add anything else in that you want to about Sayadaw U Pandita, and maybe you can describe to us who's in this picture and where this picture, of course, IMS.
It's Sayadaw U Pandita in the middle. Is it Unyanapanaka, Joseph, behind you?
Yes.
One of his translators. I forget the name of the layperson sitting in between us, who's
Right.
his other translator.
Yes.
They're sitting in front. They're sitting on the lawn of IMS. So we brought him in 1984 to IMS, never having met him before, but having heard he was a great teacher. So it was a little bit, and he arrived the day before the 3-month retreat was going to start, which we were going to sit. And then it was like, whoa, like, look at that. And the going back to what I had said originally about jhana, and sort of what happened also in some places was a sort of middle path resolution, in that people in some schools, I think notably in Thailand, would practice a concentration practice up until the experience of first jhana, not beyond that, but first jhana. And then when they switched to a more open mindfulness, what they were watching the changing nature of was all those delightful states that had been brought about by the jhana, one-pointedness and bliss and happiness, and you got to watch those kind of fade. And so I read, and as Joseph said, we were seeing U Pandita 6 days a week in 1984, and I just went through some period of suffering, physical suffering and emotional suffering. And I said to him, I'm sort of tired of this. Like, how about if you teach me metta till I can experience jhana, then I can watch the fading away of bliss and peace. I'd rather that than what I'm going through. And he laughed and he said, come to Burma. And I went to Burma.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. What an invitation.
Yeah.
Huh. Well, thank you both so much. I feel, I hope everyone else is feeling as inspired as I am from you. And maybe we could move a little bit to, I know we're approaching our time, but we started a little bit late too. So maybe we could open up to questions. Maybe Carmen has been receiving some questions, and maybe as we're waiting for that, maybe Joseph, could you kind of do that little characterization? You've mentioned it several times, but it's nice to hear kind of characterization of all the teachers all together. And in this way, we get a sense of the diversity and also the qualities we can call on as skillful means at different times.
Yes, so this was just very brief, about. So Mahasi Sayadaw was like the grandfather, of this whole tradition. And so that was kind of the archetype, in terms of how we would relate to him, just with a tremendous degree of reverence. He was really, in a way, an iconic figure in 20th century Burmese Buddhism. He had such an outsized role in the development. He had a major role in the Sixth Buddhist Council. So he was revered, and he had that kind of dignity. So just as an example of that, maybe some of you will have heard of Trungpa Rinpoche, who was, this very brilliant Tibetan teacher who was teaching in this country. And he was teaching in this country when Mahasi Sayadaw was visiting. And to my knowledge, there was not much connection between Burmese Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism. But Trungpa Rinpoche said, I'd really like to meet Mahasi Sayadaw. He is the master of mindfulness, and that really encapsulates him. When we were with Mahasi, it's not like he was practicing mindfulness. He was Mr. Mindfulness, the venerable mindfulness. It was just who he was, and so it was beautiful. It was just watching him was a transmission. Munindra ji, as I spoke a lot about him, I just have to smile every time I think of him because he was so quirky, but really emphasized just the mindfulness in every aspect of daily life, and whether on retreat, off retreat, he was just emphasizing that, but in the most lighthearted way. And as I mentioned, just his curiosity about things. We took him once when he was visiting, and we were on a trip to DC, and we went to the science, the Air and Space Museum. And with all the exhibits, they have a little description underneath, and it's a big museum. Munindra wanted to read every description of every exhibit.
Oh.
It was exhausting. I just lay down on one of the benches, in the museum, but he kept going, he had that kind of energy. and that curiosity and interest. Yeah, so, and when so like Mahasi was the great grandfather figure, and U Pandita was like the father figure. Munindra was almost like the mother figure. He's very soft, very gentle, very solicitous of our welfare. Yeah, so it was a beautiful relationship. He just didn't fit the model of what we might think of as a guru. The others were really, moved slowly and dignified, and Munindra was really speedy. But what was very remarkable for me was seeing, he moved quickly and did a lot of things, but I never saw him rushing. And that itself was a great teaching. He was so in himself, so embodied. And it was a lesson in mindfulness doesn't mean that you necessarily have to be creeping along in this very slow and mindful way. That's a way of practicing at times. But when it's developed, then mindfulness can manifest in every aspect of our lives, at any speed. And Munindra just exemplified that hugely. And as we mentioned with Dipa Ma, it was just love and peace. It was amazing. The transmission was energetic. We would go up into her room. She lived in a really poor part of Calcutta, just lived in 2 small rooms with her daughter. We go into her room, and it was really poor surroundings, but it was as if the room was filled with light. And we'd go in and we'd kind of, bow down in front of her. And then she would do this blessing where she would just run her hands over our heads and shoulders, like this and this. And as she was doing this, it was blissful, just that energetic transmission. So she was incredibly inspiring in terms of how the heart and mind can be developed. And as Sharon mentioned, Goenka was quite formal. One of the things we didn't mention about Goenka, which was a powerful part of his presence, he chanted beautifully, and he would chant every day. It was beautiful and powerful. So it's almost like a transmission came through him, through the chanting, as well as the technique of practice. And then, as we've talked about, Sayadaw U Pandita, the warrior. So they were all really different. And one of the things of value of studying with different teachers, for me, and I think for all of us, is it's a lesson that we don't have to be like anybody else. Each of these great teachers were manifesting their own personalities and their own style, but rooted in the teachings. And so in a way, it gives us permission or encouragement just to drop into ourselves and let the Dharma be expressed through our own personalities, and our own understandings. And I think that's one of the values of practicing with different teachers, that there's no single way we're supposed to be. So it's a blessing. It's a blessing to be able to study, and be in the presence, of different teachers.
It's beautiful. Thank you. That's a beautiful way to close our formal session. And I wonder, Carmen, if there's any questions that have come in, or maybe you've been looking, Sharon, as well. Any questions?
I have. I mean, I feel like some of them maybe I could answer as Carmen, quickly. Like, does Sayadaw U teach in the same lineage? Yes. And you were going to have a separate session, correct, on Sayadaw U. So a lot more coming there. Did you meet Ruth Dennison when you were studying in Burma? Or was she already in the U.S.? She was already in the U.S. She was in Burma several years before I was, for example. And mostly when Joseph and I went together was in the 80s. So it was quite a bit after that. I began practice January 71. So we had a piece of paper, like a mimeograph set of papers that were her diary from when she was in Burma, that we all used to read long before we met her. And sort of seeing her movement through practice and so on, it was very exciting, but it was almost like a different generation, sort of, like when she was in Burma. Is it necessary for a student of Buddhism to have a personal teacher? What do you think, Joseph?
Well, it definitely helps, but it's not to say that one necessarily has to wait to get started in the practice, to have that relationship, because now, especially, with the technology, the teachings are so available through so many different means, through online courses and online teachings and the meditation apps, and there are books. There are lots and lots of ways of getting established in the beginning of the practice. But at a certain point, it is really helpful, I think, to find a teacher, because we can get stuck in ways that we're not even really aware that we're stuck, or be inspired to, as Sayadaw U Pandita did, up the effort a little bit, or and so what I would suggest, at a certain point, either there's a teacher in your area that maybe you connect with, but what I would suggest for people who are looking for a teacher, maybe just to explore, for example, on Dharma Seed, just all the different talks that different teachers have given, and just see which ones that you feel resonant with. And then maybe look to see where they're teaching, and if you have the opportunity to do a retreat with them. Some teachers will do one-on-one consultations, so you can always reach out to the people you might feel connected to and ask them, are you one of those people? So I do think it's helpful, but not to wait to start one's practice, because that will come. And so I'm going to tell a Sharon story because it's very apt in terms of looking for a teacher. She was still in college, going off to India to practice, and Trungpa Rinpoche, who I mentioned earlier, had come to Buffalo, where Sharon was studying, to give a talk, and he asked for questions. People wrote questions. He picked the one Sharon had submitted, asking, how do I find a teacher? I'm going to India, I want to study meditation, how do I find a teacher? And he thought for a moment, then this is one, again, a classic one-liner, but so apt. Said, well, I think it's best that you follow the pretense of accident, and that has certainly been my experience as well. When the desire for a teacher is there, and it's sincere, somehow the universe arranges itself to lead us onward, and it may seem accidental, but now, in looking back over all these years, and I think it's true for all of us, in some sense, not necessarily a mystical one, but in some way, it's like we're all led, in our Dharma unfolding. So I would trust that, even as we make, the moves to seek out someone.
Anything else from that list there, Sharon, that you want to?
I was going to ask if you wanted to choose one.
Oh, okay. Or Carmen, did you have anything?
If Carmen wants to choose one.
Yep.
There's one that just came up. Did you have a heavy sense of responsibility bringing the teachings to the U.S. as pioneers? It must have been incredibly dynamic dealing with the integration of Western influence over the years and the transformation of the practice. Bowing down and so grateful.
I'll start, but I'd love to hear what Joseph has to say. I don't think that I had much of a sense of responsibility in the beginning because, first of all, I was very young, and second of all, it wasn't like we started out with this vision of like, if we do this well, then in 20 years there'll be. It was like nothing like that. Our mantra, the first year we opened the retreat center, which was 1976, was we can always close it in a year. If no one wants to come to meditate, if it's a total failure, we'll just close it in a year, which wasn't that pleasing. I mean, we couldn't get a mortgage, and 3 people personally went off to the bank to get personal loans so we could open it up. They weren't very happy to hear that. It's close it in a year. But it was just sort of like we did the best we could, one step in front of the other. We made a lot of mistakes, and it grew around us. It like emerged. So that's a part of it, and part of it was exciting and creative, and we used to have, because we had no specific model. There were no other centers that I knew of that were run by Westerners. It's like if you're trying to do a certain architectural design and you wanted it to be both reflective of Asia and where you were, like a barn or something like that. What does that look like? And so here we are, with Goenka, or a teacher like Goenka, saying the Buddha did not teach Buddhism. The Buddha taught a way of life. This is in no way about becoming a Buddhist. Or Jack, or will tell you that when he was about to come back and he said to Ajahn Chah, I don't think many people will be interested. They're not born Buddhists. And Ajahn Chah said, call it Christianity. So that was sort of where we'd come from. And at the same time, there was huge respect. There was the Buddha, and the fact that we have a viable technique or set of techniques that actually work. And all these years later, like I was once teaching metta, loving kindness somewhere, and somebody said to me, it's so incredible. When did you make it up? I said, I didn't make anything up, and you're lucky. So we have both things. It's like respect for the Buddha, and Buddha did not teach Buddhism. Then we thought, should we have Buddha statues here? Not everyone likes them, and some people really want them. They want to express devotion, and other people are offended by them. And and the way we phrased it was, should we have Buddhas in public places? Like what a staff person wanted to do in their room was fine, but we went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And then it turned out that Jack, when he was in Thailand in the Peace Corps, had bought a lot of Buddha statues, and they'd all been sitting in his mother's attic in Maryland, and had them shipped there. And so suddenly we had Buddhas, and we put them in public places. But it's like everything was like that. Should we do it this way? Should we do it that way? So fortunately, we had one another, and no one was doing it all alone.
Yeah, Joseph and Sharon, thank you. Go ahead, Joseph.
Yeah, so just want to add to this. I share Sharon's sense. When we first came back, we were just young and enthusiastic and loved the practice. And we weren't thinking much more than, okay, how can I share it? And somehow that youthful energy carried us. But I would say for myself, and I think it's true for all of us, that a deep sense of responsibility started to emerge or become strong when we realized the import of holding a retreat and basically being responsible for 50, 70, 100 people's minds. That this is a serious thing, because most of the people, zooming in tonight who've been on retreat know, first, that the mind can be very powerful in all kinds of ways. Sometimes it's really blissful, and sometimes a huge amount of suffering. So it is really a very big responsibility. to create a space and to hold the space as a place of safety as people go through the intensity of what they often do on retreat. And that, in our youthful enthusiasm, I don't think I was particularly aware of that for a while. Just kind of, yeah, let's all do it and we'll see what happens. But over the years of teaching and seeing what can happen, that responsibility both to the meditators, to the yogis, and also to the tradition, and more and more, I feel that that's just really important and a really strong value for many of us. And some teachers are not so connected, necessarily to wanting to preserve the tradition or the lineage. And that's just another approach as well, which is fine. But I think for most of us at IMS, there is this really strong connection to lineage. And even as we adapt it in various ways, really want to stay connected to it and have our roots be as authentically as possible in the teachings of the Buddha, as we understand them and as they were passed down to us. So the sense of responsibility, I feel, has really grown over the years.
Thank you both. So you've touched on this, maybe we could close with this. You've touched on this, just what the challenges and joys are of teaching, of cultivating this particular lineage in the context of the larger lineage. You need to just summarize or maybe close with what the challenge or joys have been.
Sharon, me?
That's you.
Okay. Okay, I think one of the biggest challenges has been when we were in India and practicing with our Asian teachers. Of course, they were very rooted, both from their study, but also from their culture, in the teachings of the Buddha. And in those cultures, many of the teachings which are foreign to us, to them just seem quite natural. Things like the teachings on rebirth and karma and all the different planes of existence, the lower planes and the human realm, and then the Deva worlds. And, I remember Munindra giving these long talks about the pleasures of the heaven realms. And personally, I loved all that. But a lot of the Westerners, very skeptical about all this because it was outside both of our cultural understanding and also outside of our personal experience. So in coming back to the West and trying to present the teachings, one of the challenges is, okay, we want to present them in a way that people can really connect with and relate their own life experience to. And so teachings about rebirth or even karma, or certainly the cosmology, the planes of existence, sometimes there's a bit of a reluctance to offer those teachings in this setting. But for me personally, I think those teachings are really important, and they express dimensions of the teachings and of an understanding of some of the fundamental principles embedded in the First Noble Truths. I mean, the First Noble Truth is the truth of dukkha, of suffering, unsatisfactoriness. Well, that's much bigger than having a pain in our knee. When we understand the magnitude of what's meant by that over lifetimes and over realms of existence, if we can relate to that in some way, to me, it just enlarges and enriches the understanding of what we're doing. It's not necessary to believe it. And I think this is an important point. And Munindraji would often reply when people he'd be speaking about all the Deva worlds, and people would, I don't really believe that stuff. And Munindra his response was, it doesn't matter. You don't have to believe it. It's not a requisite for enlightenment. It's true, but you don't have to believe it. And so just over all these years of teachings, I try to bring in those aspects that may not be as accessible, as the basic teachings of mindfulness and paying attention, to our body, to our mind. Because I feel that the scope of the Buddhist teachings is so vast and so rich. But this is a challenge. This is one of the challenges of bringing the teachings from Asia to the West.
Thanks.
One more thing just came.
Okay.
One more challenge is, how do we inspire the kind of effort that U Pandita represented without driving people crazy? Because in our culture, over-efforting is a real problem, And so finding that balance of inspiring people to make effort, but without leading them to get stressed out and over effort. So that also, that's an interesting teaching challenge.
Yeah, can see that very much so. Yeah, thank you. Maybe you can talk about any challenges, Sharon, and then maybe we can close with the joy. What's been a joy for you? Both. Mm-hmm.
There's so much of both. There are a lot of challenges, but it's kind of in the light of creativity, so, and I'm grateful that I still think of myself as a student and I'm still learning. And so just as one example with loving kindness practice, as I was taught, and I teach it really the way I was taught, the underlying principle is that we're doing this practice in the easiest way possible. And that is why in the formal sequence of the classical practice, you start with offering loving kindness to yourself, because you yourself are supposed to be the easiest person of all. And then as the practice evolves, not all in one session, but over time, you're offering loving kindness to people who are a little more remote or a little more difficult or a lot more difficult, and finally all beings everywhere. And so, but that notion of starting with yourself being the easiest of all, and then confronting the reality of not nearly for a lot of people. And then what do? And so sort of, I always try to go back to my understanding of the underlying principle. And I said, shift the order, just change the order. And I think that's right, but that's a process of trying to figure out, what seems right in this way. And so, but there's a lot of joy in that too. There's a lot of joy in really just people's willingness to practice and their interest in it, and they're looking within, and given everything that is involved in that, and it's so exciting.
Thanks,
Jessica,
Sharon.
do you want to describe a joy, or do you want to lead us in a final meditation, not for 3 hours?
Well, the meditation is a joy, even when it's difficult. And so for me, the joy is the fact that there is a path, and it leads to greater love and compassion and wisdom and freedom. And the fact that there is a well-trodden path, as Sharon said, we're not making this up. People have been walking on this path for thousands of years, and it's borne fruit. And somehow, to appreciate, we might say, the good karma of our connecting with these teachings and the path. I just have so much gratitude for the fact that there is a path to follow, and I'm able to practice, as best I can on it, and to experience, to some extent, the fruits of the practice. So one of my most recent favorite definitions of enlightenment is lightening up. The whole path is a process of lightening up, which basically means becoming less and less self-referential. The ego self is this huge burden. And the more we see the emptiness of that, we do lighten up in our lives. And when I look back, I'm so much happier now than I was, many years ago. So this is a great joy of the practice, to see it work, and then to be able to share it. So yeah, it's wonderful that we can all be doing this together and sharing in this joy. Yeah. So Sharon, I think I think Jeannie had mentioned ending with a sharing of merit. So you do that very well.
Oh, shucks. So do you. Okay. So, okay, Jeannie.
Yep.
Again, if you want to sit comfortably, the idea of the sharing of the merit comes out of a very classical Buddhist belief, that is, when we do something toward the good, we're kind, we're generous, we're restrained. Like, it would be awfully easy to tell a lie, but we don't. We meditate, or we study, we think things through, we ask questions. All of these are considered to generate a very positive energy, and that's what's called merit. And we come to concluding an action or something like that, and rather than lie back on the couch thinking I made a lot of merit, we dedicate it, we offer it, we share it with others. So I'm going to just repeat this with the words I use, and you're welcome to repeat silently whatever words you would like to use in this exercise. So the first part of it is actually feeling the energy. There are lots of ways of spending our time. So this isn't the same thing as conceit or arrogance. It's realizing that we can appreciate the goodness we were drawn to, coming together, thinking, practicing, and let that fill you. And these are the words that I would use. I feel that energy and I offer it. First, to those who have helped me in some way. Maybe they helped me have the free time to do this, or they helped me long ago by telling me about their meditation practice. And I repeat, I share the merit of my practice with you. May you be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease. So whoever comes to mind that's helped in some way, we make this offering of the positive energy. And those who we know are hurting or struggling in some way, as an affirmation that our inner work could never be just for ourselves alone. I share the merit of my practice with you. May you be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease. and one another as we've co-created this experience. Share the merit of my practice with you. May you be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease. And all beings everywhere, all people, all creatures, all those in existence. I share the merit of my practice with all beings. May all beings be safe, be happy, be healthy, and live with ease. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes and we'll end that session.
Sharon and Joseph. Endless gratitude. A prairie sky full of gratitude from all of our hearts to yours for this transmission today. Let's leave it there, a prairie sky full from all of us to you. Thank you for connecting us to this lineage and to the heart of this, the passion and love you have for the practice so clearly and dearly today. I know that it's inspired each of our hearts and we'll carry this forward with us. Thank you. And friends, this is the first of our gatherings. We'll gather again in January. And so let's carry Joseph and Sharon and Munindra and Dipa Ma, Sayadaw U Pandita, Mahasi Sayadaw, Goenka with us in our hearts today. And let's go to gallery view as we say goodbye to the whole community, as Sharon just said, to all beings. Let's go to gallery view and we can wave each other out, wave each other home, and appreciate the presence that we've all co-created together, as Sharon said.